to be back on campus. Can you guys hear me okay? I don't think that's close enough. Is that better? You guys can hear me? Okay. So today I thought I would start by showing a little clip of one of my favorite people. So we're going to go start us off.
And now, without further ado, I present the Regional Manager of Dunder Mifflin Scranton, Michael Scott.
Hello, everyone. I am Michael Scott.
Hello, I'm Brandon Hidalgo, CEO of the teaching company.
And I'd like to start today by inspiring you. May I borrow someone's textbook, please? Thank you. What have we here? Ooh, economics. Very, very interesting. You cannot learn from books. Replace these pages with life lessons, and then you will have a book that is worth its weight in gold. I know these are expensive, but the lesson is priceless. Good. All right. I think you're inspired. Shall we proceed? There are 4 kinds of business: tourism, food service, railroads, and sales, and hospitals / manufacturing, and air travel. Okay, I'm seeing some confused faces out there. Let me slow down a little bit, break this down. Okay. The more stickers you sell, the more profit. You need supply. You need something to sell. Now, this could be anything. It could be a thingamajig, or a woozy-wussy, or a whatchamacallit. Now, you need to sell those in order to have a payday. And if you sell enough of them, you will make a 100 grand. Satisfied?
All right. I had to. Let's go. Okay. So I had to set the bar a little bit low so I could at least get higher than Michael Scott. So my first question is, not who do we have here, but why are you here? Why aren't you guys in Vegas right now for the game tonight? I'm a little disappointed. It's a much better event down there, but hopefully we do well tonight. But just by show of hands, so there was a couple econ majors. How many are majoring in the business school? And so the outside, what schools are you guys in majoring outside of the business school? Just yell them out. Computer science? Okay. I know there's statistics. Music? Okay. All right. What else? Engineering. Okay. That's good. Like you said, I majored in economics, and it's the shortest major at BYU. By the time I realized I didn't like economics, I was too close to graduating, so I finished with it. But anyways, so we're going to talk a little bit about these things. So first I'll give a little bit about my story, my history, and then I'll talk about kind of taking a different path than most entrepreneurs, and then I'll talk about my current company, what I'm doing, kind of give you some background on that and how I got there. And then I want to talk a little bit about funding. That's something that I think entrepreneurs need to be aware of. I have a little bit of history in that, working in venture capital and investing in companies and whatnot, so I thought I'd share some things about what goes into if you ever go down the path of needing to get some capital for your company and whatnot, and some different options you can pursue. So a little bit about me. I majored in economics. This was a long time ago. 2000 I graduated, and my senior year I was working for, this was like the first internet.com bubble, and I was working while I was in school as a project manager for this internet company. And I had never programmed before. I didn't really know software development or anything. So I was on the project management side, but I was interacting with these engineers, and I had no idea what they were talking about. They were using these words that I'd never heard of. And I was an econ major. I didn't want to go to law school. I didn't want to get a PhD in economics. I didn't know what I was going to do once I graduated. So it was actually my wife's suggestion. She heard about a intro to the computer science department was having kind of an open night. And she said, why don't you go, learn about that and see if there's any interest there. And I was like, it would be good to kind of know what these engineers are talking about at work. So I went to that, and I said, maybe I'll take the intro to computer science class at BYU, and that class changed the trajectory of my career. I fell in love with programming and software, and still finished in econ because I was almost done, but I took a handful of computer science classes at BYU, and then I went to San Diego, which is where I grew up, and went to the Cal State University that was in the town where I grew up, and did a master's there. I worked during school and then after school with an internet company, actually a game company. I'll go through here. So this company, BuzzTime, so I did my master's. And then at BuzzTime, this company was, LDS people aren't the right population for knowing this company, but they have games at bars and restaurants. So sometimes if you go to like a TGI Fridays, they used to have them. I don't think they do anymore. But restaurants like that and a lot of bars, they'd actually have these games where you'd get this unit from the bar or the restaurant, and you'd actually play along. They'd have a TV screen. And during the day, they'd have trivia games going, and so there's constantly trivia going. But then when there's sporting events, there's actually play-along sporting events, and I'm big into sports, so this was a lot of fun. So they were like the first ones to create interactive games that played alongside sporting events. So they started the company in the 80s, and they would predict if, or you would predict if you're watching a football game on TV, if the team's going to run or pass, if they're going to throw deep or short, and you'd put in your prediction, and then back at the headquarters of this company, they actually had this wall of TVs. I mean, it was this massive wall, and every single game was on, and they had these, what they called referees, that were, once the team actually did it, they'd punch it into the system, and they would send it out to all these people playing live, and it's kind of unheard of. It was definitely before a lot of this is now pretty common, but they kind of pioneered that. And so I worked on building those types of games outside of the restaurant industry, so on your cell phone and on the internet, and also on your cable set-top box. So I built these games. So it was a lot of fun. I'm not a big gamer, but these games were a little bit different, and a lot of them were sports related, not all of them, but so I enjoyed that. That's where I really learned a lot of things. It was a fast-paced environment where I still remember to this day, I was still in school, getting my master's, working there part-time. So one day when I was at school, they had a big round of layoffs, and I wasn't there for that. And so my boss called me that night and told me, hey, just so you know, I just got fired today. And I was like, oh, I'm sorry to hear that. What about me? Do I have a job there? And he said, they didn't say anything about you, because I was only part-time. I wasn't full-time there. And he said, why don't you just go to work tomorrow and see what they say? And I went to work, and nobody said anything, because I was, not on their radar for the management team. And so I guess I still had a job, and ended up having to do my boss's job and several other people that got laid off. So it was a great learning experience for me, kind of got thrown into the deep end, having to do a lot of things, but I grew a ton from that and got a ton of exposure of the entire process of software development and a lot of different aspects of there. So that was pretty cool, but at one point I kind of tired of it. I wanted to do more. I always kind of had an interest in business, economics. My original plan was to do more in the finance realm of things. And so at one point I said it's time to do an MBA. And so I came back to BYU, did a full-time MBA here, and loved it. It was great experience. And during that, I got involved in a group called Cougar Capital, which is a student-run venture capital fund where they actually invest real money into startups alongside professional venture capitalists. And that kind of opened my eyes to this world of venture capital and investing, and I felt like it was a great combination of my technical background as well as my business interests. So I pushed really hard. It's very hard to get into. There's not a lot of, they're not constantly hiring. These are usually very small firms. And I was fortunate enough to get an internship with a group called Cross Creek Advisors up in Salt Lake, and worked with them throughout the MBA school after interning with them, and then actually worked with them full time for a few months, probably about 6 months after MBA school. And then, and that was this Wasatch. Wasatch was kind of the parent company, and Cross Creek was the venture arm of them. And then I had the opportunity to go to this company called In Healthcare, and there, this was like an old print newsletter business, and they were dying. They were literally like barely scraping by month to month to pay the bills, and print, it was kind of Michael Scott's story of paper was dying, and they were like, we got to get on the internet, and they were slow to adopt the internet, and they had some things there, but it wasn't really their expertise, and so had a chance to come in and run their engineering and their marketing, and then eventually became the CEO. And there I learned a lot of valuable lessons. Unfortunately, we weren't able to turn it around. There just wasn't enough of a runway. We were making progress towards turning it around, but ultimately we decided it was in the best interest financially to merge my company in with, it was kind of a sister company owned by the same parent company. And so so myself and my team that I had built out to run that, we kind of merged in with this company that happened to be in Salt Lake. I worked there for a few months, kind of during a transition, and there wasn't really a role for me. There wasn't really a need. It wasn't a technology company per se that brought us in, and so we ended up parting ways after a few months of being there. So at that point, I decided, what am I going to do next? I needed to, I always, or I can't say I always wanted to start a company. I actually feel like I'm very late to the game in doing that. I didn't go to this type of class when I was an undergrad. I didn't know about the startup world when I graduated from my master's in computer science. This was when everything was crashing in the internet days. So nobody was even thinking about starting a company in the early 2000s. You were lucky to have a job in the tech scene back then, and so, which is very odd to think of, but there are cycles in all industries. So at that point, so I kind of went through this phase of, I'm pretty risk averse as a person. I'm not the type that's going to go all big and raise a ton of money to try to be the next, big name company here in Utah. So I kind of took things in a different path. So I started off as a consultant, mostly working back with the venture capital firm that I had worked at previously. And I did that for a few years, consulting them, helping them with mostly on their technology deals. I also started kind of building some software that they were using. And that kind of evolved to where I started to build some software for some other companies in the area. And so then I kind of turned into what I would call as a solopreneur. So I was kind of a one-man shop, and I had contract work to help me, but it wasn't a company. I didn't view myself as an entrepreneur, but I was profitable, which is better than a lot of companies can say. And so I was doing well, financially. It was better than a job. So I did that for a few years, and then really just in the last couple years is where I feel like I've started to kind of make that step where now we're starting to really create what I would say is a business and a company. And so I kind of say, right now I'm kind of in this transition between a solopreneur and an entrepreneur. So we'll see how it goes in this phase. And so I kind of, like I said, I'm taking a slower path than I think probably what you've heard in this class. And I want to talk about that. I was debating, like, do I come in and try to pretend like my company is amazing and it's going to be the next IPO, but it's not. I mean, there's three people working in it right now, and we're taking it slow. We're completely bootstrapped. I haven't taken any money, and we're trying to figure out a repeatable business model. And so, so today I want to talk about there are different ways to go about entrepreneurship. There isn't just one path. Everybody has a different story. Everybody has a different approach that they take and has advice. And so hopefully what you learn from this is just there's different ways that you can go about it. And taking it slow has its advantages. So I like this quote, just because my path is different doesn't mean I'm lost. I still work in the venture capital world, so I talk to a lot of companies and CEOs. I know a lot of CEOs, and their path is different than mine. They're at a high growth rate and all about tripling their sales every year over year, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. For me, it's about knowing who you are, knowing what your strengths are, and making sure that you're tailoring your approach around that to fit to your strengths and optimizing around that. So entrepreneurship later in life. So I am now in my 40s, which is crazy to say, but like I said, I didn't start a business in school. I wasn't selling candy in high school or anything like that. I wasn't, really even thinking about doing this until after I had gained a valuable skill set in software development that I had the confidence to say, yes, I can do this. And so the pro for me is, I had that knowledge of, I had seen it before. I had been involved in companies that had taken a product from idea to out into the market. So I knew I could do that and accomplish it. I also had connections through MBA school and venture capital that could help me, and that are helping me now, that benefited me by doing it later in life. And I also had some fun, so I had the necessary capital on my own to get it started on my own and get going in that way. So those are some of the pros of starting later in life. There's definitely cons as well. It's tougher. When I started, when I got laid off, so I technically got laid off at that last company. My wife was pregnant with our fourth child. And so she was born, and there's a lot more risk when you've got a wife and 4 kids that you've got to make sure that you're accounting for. So that's a bigger challenge that you got to take care of. The other challenge is a lot of my friends, mostly from MBA school, I really wanted to find a partner to go in with me, and I've done many attempts at that over the years. And one of the challenges is when my friends in MBA school, they were in a situation where they weren't ready to take that risk. They had their steady jobs, they had their families as well, and so my kind of circle of friends weren't willing to jump off the cliff, so to speak, with me, and so that's been a challenge where I've kind of been on my own doing that, and trying to figure that out on myself. So that's one of the things that I've learned of taking a different path. The other one is Techy SEO. So by raise of hands, how many of you guys feel like, actually, if you were to be a founder of a business, it's kind of, I'd probably say there's 3 roles that you should feel like you could fill. One of them would be helping on building the product. The other one would be selling or marketing that product. And then the third one would be, if you can't do either of those 2, then you're probably out fundraising to raise more money to get the business going. So by raise of hand, if you were to be in one of those roles, would you raise your hand if you'd be on the sales and marketing side? Okay. If you'd be on the product side, building the product. Okay. If you'd be the fundraiser. Not as many. Okay. So being a techie, that's been a good and a bad. So I know very deeply what goes into our product. I'm involved with it. I try to continue to step myself out of it as much as I can over time, but I'm still very much involved in what goes into the product and how it's built, and because of that, I know where the opportunities are in the marketplace to try to go after, and what it would take to go after and solve those problems from the product side. So that's been a huge plus. The downside is that takes a lot of time. When you're building a product, it takes a lot of time. You spend hours and hours, and you need dedicated hours. It's really hard to context switch between working on building a product and then switch to sales and marketing. So that's something that I've struggled with over the years, in finding that balance of where do I spend my time. So that's been a challenge as well, but it's one that I want to do. Ultimately, I see myself more on the business side and not building the product, but still being very, very involved with it. And it's something that I feel passionately about. I've talked to, there's not many CEOs of companies in the software world that would call themselves technical, that came up through kind of the engineering route. It's kind of rare. I've met a few of them in Utah, and I've talked to them about this, and they kind of say the same thing. Like, I wish there was more in the Bay Area. There are more engineers that then become the management or the CEO, and there's inherent benefits to that can help the company do that. So if you are on that technical side and on that product side, don't think that you have to only be there. I think there's advantages to breaking out of that over time. I think early on you're always involved in that, but you don't have to. And that was one of the reasons why I came back to MBA school. When I worked at BuzzTime, I would talk to the management team, they were great people, and I'd say, I want more exposure to the marketing stuff. And they were hesitant because they needed my help on building the product, and so I never really got that experience until after MBA school, when I actually had to run a marketing department to really do that. So MBA was kind of a way for me to kind of break that mold and get out of wearing just an engineering hat and get on more of the business side of things. The other thing is, it takes a unique personality. You kind of have to wear 2 hats of like being an introvert when you're building a product, and you're focused in on that, and then also being an extrovert. And So I think, not everybody has that capability. Some definitely are more suited for one than the other. So that's one of the reasons. That's probably one of the big reasons why you don't see as many. It kind of does take a unique skill set. So now I've got this company called Openside. Like I said, it's kind of evolved out of a couple projects that I was working on for companies. And I'm not going to go too deep into it, but basically we work with sales and marketing departments, and we help them just optimize their workflows. So when you go out into, especially if you're working in anything that does a lot of online marketing, the amount of different software systems that you have to use is pretty crazy, and it's only getting more complex. There's so many different avenues of marketing that require some kind of dedicated software solution to solve that. And so the challenge is when you've got all these different systems, they all don't talk nice to each other, and you've got data spread out across different databases and different software systems. And so that's kind of the pain that we help companies solve, is come in and say, how do we make this more efficient for you? And then help you get your data out of those systems so that you can better access it. And then have your systems talk to each other and be more integrated across systems. So this is kind of a scenario of what we would look like. So we kind of say we're this, kind of your home base where all your systems can come to and communicate with, and then any workflows that need to touch multiple endpoints can be built on top of our system. And we're kind of, so this is kind of a use case for one of my customers. So it's actually the venture capital firm that I'm still a venture partner at and help them with. They want to get all of their data as well as access to different data sources like LinkedIn and a bunch of financial data. They want to bring that all into a centralized database so that they can then access it and see kind of this universal source of truth. And so this is one of the projects type of projects that we work on. So they're fun. They involve lots of data and integration, and that's kind of what I enjoy doing. So for the next 10-15 minutes, I want to talk about funding and the different ways that you can go access capital. So like I said, I had no idea where you could get money before MBA school. But then when I got exposed to venture capital, venture capital is great. Like I've met amazing people that work in venture capital. I've met amazing CEOs that have run some amazing companies that could not have done it without raising millions and millions of dollars from venture capitalists. But there's things that you need to be aware of if you do decide to go that path and raise venture money. So this is kind of a typical model of how venture capital works. Typically, they'll spread their money out across a handful of companies and have a portfolio or basket of companies. And most of them end up here. They don't make any money, and they just are kind of a write-off. It was kind of a failed experiment. And then you get a couple that break even or make a little bit of money back to their investors. And then you'll get just a few select ones that really go big. And these are the ones that you hear about. These are the stories that get written up. These are the names that you hear about. And but they're the few. They're very, very far and few between that actually get to that level. And working at Cross Creek, which is a later stage investment, we typically start investing in companies when they are, they've already got a market. They're typically doing 50 million in revenue or more a year, and they're kind of on a path to go to a public company to become a publicly traded company and do an IPO. And we look at all these companies that by any measurement, you'd probably say that's a pretty good company. You know, they've got a couple hundred employees. They are generating, you know, a good amount of revenue. But then we look at them and we get really technical. We look at their financial models. We'll do a deep analysis of the management team. We'll call up people that have worked with them or for them 10 plus years ago to get a good sense of how they are as managers. And we kind of put them through the ringer. And very few of these, what are normally really good companies, actually make it past our bar that we then invest in. And hopefully we do well at finding the ones that actually do end up going public or having a good exit. So we're kind of playing in companies that are already up in here in this quadrant and then trying to get them to an even over an even tighter bar. And so I've learned from that is it takes a lot of skill, a lot of money, a lot of luck to get to that level. And it's not easy. And so the thing about venture capital is if that first check that you take from a venture capitalist, the expectation that he has for you is that you're going to be one of these companies up here. That's what he's banking on. And you need to go in with that mindset that you're going to do whatever it takes to become one of those breakout companies. Anything less than that is really not acceptable to them. I mean, they're not, you know, they can't do anything and they'll still be nice to you and they'll still, you know, wish the best for you. But this is what they're looking for. And you have to tell a story that makes them believe that you can be one of those companies. And they're getting earlier and earlier. One of the trends of venture capital is there's even dedicated venture capital firms that just give money to college students. Like they're going earlier and earlier because they want to find that next, you know, big win. They want to find the next Google or Omniture or whatever. And so it's easier and easier, especially for people of your age to get access to venture capital. And that's okay. Like I said, it's about knowing what your strengths are and what your goals are, and just going in bright eyes, knowing that that's the expectation that they have for you when you take their money. So that's okay. That's one way of going, but it's not the only way. It's not the only way that you can raise money and get access to capital that can help your company grow. Obviously, the best way is customers. That's really how I've done it. But you reach a point. I'm now at a point where I'm likely going to take on capital in the next year to take things up a notch with my company. But to this point, I've gotten here completely off of customer funding, which has been nice because then I only have to answer to my customers and make sure that I'm meeting their needs and not somebody else's. So a couple other ways when you do actually need real capital to take things up a notch. There's another approach. So there's a group that actually came from venture capital, and he actually lives in Utah, the guy that started this, and he calls it Indy About VC, so that's his website you could check out. And that's kind of their slogan. So a unicorn is a name that they give to these breakout companies that are valued at $1 billion or more. So if you're valued at $1 billion or more, then they call you a unicorn because they are so rare. And amazingly, Utah actually has like 4 or 5 right now that have broken over that and are in the unicorn class. So there are companies that have done it here in Utah, and they're in that category. But he's kind of the anti-unicorn approach, and he's kind of spreading this message of taking a different path. And how his model works is it's kind of a hybrid between debt and equity. So when typically venture capital is all equity. So if they write you a check for $1 million, they're going to say your company is worth $2 million. I wrote you a check for $1 million. That means we now own 50% of your company because they gave you $1 million and they said it's worth $2 million, and you accept those terms. So now your company is worth $2 million. That you have $1 million in cash, but now you only own 50% of the company. So that's how venture capital works on the equity side. This is a hybrid where they will take some equity, but they also take some debt, but it's not as strict as like a bank, where a bank, if you tried to go to a bank, one, they wouldn't lend to you at this stage when you're this early, but if they did, in the rare case, they would say, I'll give you money, but if your company fails, I'm going after your house or some other collateral that you put up, and basically a personal guarantee that you'll cover the loan. So these guys don't do that, so they don't come after your house. If your company fails, it's written off as a loss to them. But if things do continue and you are profitable, you pay back how much money you took from them plus kind of some interest. Usually it's not an interest rate that they set on it, but you basically pay back a percentage until you've paid back 3 times the amount of money that you've taken from them. And so their hope is that they go after companies that are sustainable and long-lasting and profitable. So they're looking for profitable companies. And that's kind of the thing is most companies that take venture capital money are not profitable because they're investing so much into trying to grow the business as fast as they can that they're not profitable because they're spending so much. But there are a lot of companies, even in the tech world, that are profitable and have the ability to pay down this cash that they take on in that note. So that's kind of a hybrid approach that you could potentially explore. There are some other groups that might be able to do this. This is still getting started. I'd probably say this is still kind of an experiment to see what the market is for this type of fundraising. And then there's a third one, and this one is the one that I prefer and probably will explore down the road. So this is called revenue-based financing. And how this works is obviously it implies that you have revenue, and what they do is they'll just take a percentage of your revenue until you've paid back the money that you've taken from them plus an additional amount, so up to 2 times the money that you've taken back. They don't take any equity, which means they don't have any direct say. They don't sit on your board of advisors or anything like that to kind of dictate the direction that you take your company. You maintain complete ownership and complete control of your company. The one thing is it requires that you have revenue. So this obviously wouldn't work for a lot of tech companies that care more about eyeballs or visitors to their site or downloads or whatnot. It requires revenue to pay back. But the cool thing about it is it will adjust. So it's a percentage of revenue. It's not like a mortgage where you have to pay the same amount every month no matter what. This will adjust. So if you have a slow month, then the amount that you owe back to them is decreased. If you have a good month, then you can pay back more. So it's always fixed to whatever revenue you bring in. And a solid option as well for companies that can be profitable, that can afford to pay back some of their revenue in that sense, and still allow you to fund the company for future expansion and hiring and getting things up to that next level. So I won't spend a ton of time with these, but there's just different paths between revenue-based financing and VC-based financing of how you'd get there and where you'd get your money from as you grew your company. And where it would come. So in both now in the VC world, this slide is probably outdated, but it's getting easier and easier to go straight to, seed venture capital funds that are willing to write a check when you just have, a prototype of your product or something like that, if they think it can be a breakout winner. But this is the revenue-based route, where you can, once you kind of have to obviously get to a point where you've got enough revenue that they feel comfortable with, that they'll get their money back and go from there. And this is, and it's faster. They make, and there's actually a lot of groups out there. There's at least 2 that I know of that are in Utah, and others that are willing to invest in Utah companies. And so there's more options on that path as well. So that's kind of what I wanted to share, is that the main thing is know who you are, know what your strengths are. If you don't have to be this super salesman to start a company, and be sometimes we put these CEOs up on a pedestal that they're untouchable or whatnot, but there's lots of paths in entrepreneurship. There's lots of ways to go your own route and do things the way that you want to do them, and still be successful, and still beats having a boss. I didn't share this, but at the company that I got fired from before I started on my own, debating if I say this on camera, but so when my company merged with the parent company, or with our sister company, and we had, and so I became like a VP of that company, and the CEO of that company, he was so strict. He would keep track. He purposely put his office where he could look out the window of his office and see who was going into the break room and who was going into the bathroom. And he would keep track of how much time people were spending in the break room and the bathroom, and by department. And then he'd send out emails to the department heads and say, your team's spending too much time in the break room. And when he laid me off, it was the happiest day of my life. I felt like I was going to jail every day going to that company. And it was a different experience. And that was one of the things, was I was done having a boss. I don't want to have a boss anymore. So that was one of the big reasons why I said I'm going to do my own thing and take my own path. And just close with, let's beat the Zags tonight. Hopefully you guys are going to watch tonight, 7 o'clock for the West Coast Championship. And that's all I have for you today.